I'm going to bring you back to a time before many of you were born. The year was 1994. I was 13 years old. My so-called life had just come out. Friends had premiered. Kurt Cobain had died. And my parents announced to me that we were moving to Spain for a year. At that point in my life, I had just started to feel like I knew who I was. After a very rocky grade school experience full of mean girls, by 8th grade, I felt like I had finally found my cool self. I rocked thrifted corduroy grandpa pants that were 3 times too big for me. I wore like those shirts that were all about hemp and all of the various ways it could be used in addition to other things. I wore giant concert t-shirts. I had friends. We went to movies together. We hung out in each other's basements. I played the violin. I was good at art. I was not like cheerleader cool, but I had a place in the social hierarchy. It also feels worth mentioning that this was like right around the time when I met Matt Meyer. It just feels important that you should know that. We met each other at camp when we were really little. That 4, right? Yeah, it was 94. Anyway, I had a group, I had a rhythm, I had a fragile but growing sense of belonging. And then overnight, it was gone. And I found myself living on Calle Viriato in Madrid with the only people I knew, my parents, watching my classmates smoke cigarettes out the window, and wishing I'd paid a significantly more amount of attention in Spanish class. There is a special kind of lostness that happens when you are 13 and far away from home, staring down a cafeteria line and not knowing how to ask for a fork. It wasn't just about finding my way around a new place. It was about realizing that who I was, or who I thought I was built partly around and by the landscape that I had lived in. When you take away the familiar streets, the language, the rituals of home, suddenly you aren't sure. You aren't just lost geographically, you are lost within yourself. I wasn't the funny one anymore. I wasn't the artistic one anymore. I was just the girl who did not understand what was going on ever. That year taught me painfully and beautifully that identity is not a fixed thing. It is a river, not a monument. It flows and it adapts. It can be dismantled and rebuilt. It can be expanded by change. But once you've been the awkward, stumbling outsider, once you've sat through entire classes without understanding more than a few scattered words, you don't forget, again, how much courage it takes for someone to start over. When I came back to the United States, I saw things differently. Not only had ska taken over, but I noticed how easily it was to take fluency, social, linguistic, and cultural for granted. I noticed how quick we are to assume that someone who is struggling with words is also struggling with intelligence, when really they might just be brilliant in a language we don't understand or in an area we're not familiar with. Spain taught me humility, taught me to listen more closely. That year taught me that the world is always bigger than the room we've been sitting in. It also taught me something else, that being lost isn't always a crisis. Sometimes it's a portal, it's an opportunity. a chance to meet parts of yourself that you would never have met had you stayed in your familiar environment, a chance to widen your empathy, a chance to choose more consciously how you will move through your next part of your life. When we are lost, not just geographically, but spiritually, we need tools to find our way again. And maps are really wonderful, but maps assume that the territory is staying the same. I love a 5-year plan. I really do. But sometimes we need a way to orient that doesn't assume a static place to move through. Wayfinding is different. Wayfinding is relational. Wayfinding is less about knowing where you're going and more about learning how to be fully present where you are. It's less about control and more about relationship with yourself, with the land, with mystery, and with community. Wayfinding says, I don't know exactly where I'm going, but I trust that if I stay awake and I listen carefully and I move with care, the path will begin to reveal itself. Over the years, I've built a personal toolkit for some of these moments. It's not fancy and it's not perfect, but it works for me, and I highly recommend you go home and write some things down that really work for you when you are totally lost in your identity. Mine are walking in the woods, journaling, sitting in quiet meditation when I can manage it, making collages when words won't come. That's a really good way for me to figure out some deeper feelings that I'm not able to access with the verbal part of my intelligence. Talking to a good therapist who reminds me that there are patterns even when I can't see them. Traveling, even just to the town over, just to see and remind yourself that everything is bigger than the space that you've been occupying. And finally, friendship, I think, is probably my main tool for wayfinding when I've really lost myself. By the end of my year in Spain, I did have friends. They knew me and they helped me know different sides of myself than I had ever met before. I had to lean on warmth, I had to lean on music and art instead of language. I leaned into experiences, going to movies, going on roller coasters. You don't need any language to enjoy going on a roller coaster with someone. And I realized that without a shared cultural narrative, I was still me, right? Like, in the end, there was a core element of my selfhood that came through, that was found by the people who were kind enough to wait to find me. I didn't disappear with the scenery, and I just got to see different aspects of myself, many, many different mirrors of me, right? A few years ago, 7 years ago, I got sober, and I had to do this again. This was like a really big reorientation to self. I had to develop new habits and new coping mechanisms, and I was really scared I was going to lose all of my friends because it feels like a massive shift inside yourself. But it turned out that, kind of like my year in Spain, I just needed to meet myself with new and loving eyes. I didn't really lose any friends. I wasn't, as it turns out, a completely different person. I still joyfully and loudly show up at parties. I still love dancing at weddings. I'm still anxious in the morning. Turns out that wasn't the alcohol. Getting lost reminds us that we aren't on a governed path to begin with. Being in the weeds and off the trail is just as much a part of the human experience as knowing exactly where you're going. One of my favorite quotes is by the author of The Little Prince, Antoine Saint-Exupéry. Please don't shoot me if you speak French. He writes, "One will weave the canvas, another will fell the tree by the light of his axe. Yet another will forge nails, and there will be others who observe the stars to learn how to navigate. And yet all will be as one. Building a boat isn't about weaving canvas or forging nails or reading the sky. It is about giving a shared taste for the sea, by the light of which you will see nothing contradictory, but rather a community of love. And I love this so much because it reminds me that our way isn't something we have to find alone. Chances are good that if you feel lost or I feel lost, so do a lot of other people in our lives. And we are allowed to be lost together. As we face a country in profound crisis, many of us feel scattered and exhausted. May we remind each other that being lost is part of being found. That being out of control is often when our deepest learnings begin. It's friends who remind you of who you are becoming and who you've always been, and it's communities like this one that choose belonging over and over again over certainty. So if you're feeling a little lost right now, if the old landmarks have disappeared, if your old identity is no longer fitting you, welcome. You are not broken. You are in the middle of becoming, and you are not alone. You have your own deep instincts. You have the quiet companions of poetry and music and friends and prayer. And you are building something bigger than a destination. You are building a way of being. You are building a metaphorical boat, a life stitched together by attention and courage and community with a shared taste for the sea. We extinguish our chalice. Go forth with your senses wide open. Let disorientation be your teacher, and trust that even when the path disappears, your wayfinding tools of curiosity, compassion, creativity, and connection will guide you.